Welcome. Today's post is Coffee and Water. Published on October 30, 2022. Jeffrey Epstein bought St. James Island, now known as Epstein Island, in 1998. From 2005 to 2020, Joe Biden's brother, James Biden, owned part of Water Island. This is the closest island to St. James Island. Odd coincidence. James Biden moving next to James Island. What would it mean if it wasn't a coincidence? There's a lot to unpack here. Here are the topics we'll be decoding today. You can always find this list in the description below. If you enjoy this video, please press the like button and subscribe for weekly full-length blog posts and shorter, more shareable videos. Let's begin. The official narrative on most popular shows is that their popularity was often unexpected. I don't buy that. I am confident that everything that has ever been popular has been planned out extensively to be popular. They are planned out to be popular because they often exist as messaging for something else, something secret. A few weeks ago I first decoded one of the most popular sitcoms of all time. September 17, 1991, Home Improvement debut, installing deadbolt security lock. September 17, 1991, Linux first released, new computer security. The symbolism for improving your home by installing a deadbolt lock, and Linux was, in relation to Mac/Windows, a deadbolt lock in security. The show has a show within a show format and the local TV show run out of the home, as this represented the recording of footage from the home to foreign operatives. This was the big break of Pamela Anderson, who as Lisa gave the tools to Tim. Consider how an Apple computer symbol ties into a Unix one. Which one is being spied on by which? The episode involves a running gag about trying to seal up an exposed but crack, because the point is precisely in preventing exposure. There are many that spy on others using computers, and to do so in a way that keeps themselves out of jail is critical. These operations are promoted using the most popular media of the day. I bring up this decode because this week I made progress taking it further. Red Hat Linux. August 13, 1997, South Park debut. Plus 2 days. August 15, 1997, GNOME primary OS for Linux debut. December 14, 1998, GNOME's primary backer, Red Hat, sells to Intel/Netscape. Plus 2 days. December 16, 1998, Gnomes episode, South Park 17. This explains the origin of South Park as a popular show. It was a marker for the new OS made for homes involved in local networks. These include MK Ultra ops as well as blackmail. Given the very first episode involves a child kicking a baby like a football, this likely is not a surprise. The football-shaped head is a reference to Charlie Brown, which itself, as I've decoded in numerous posts, is another piece of MK literature. The symbolism of children abusing children. As this is how people trying to begin in that world offer services growing up. Proving loyalty and offering a service as they help mold programmable assets. In South Park's case, it not only does this as a marker, but the show itself reinforces it, as the early show promotes illegal acts, and this has the benefit of normalizing deviant thought. It's all okay to show child abuse as funny so long as somebody learns a lesson at the end, right? This doesn't mean it stayed as a vehicle for these MK comms, but it did get its original promotion due to it. You don't get a voice if you aren't cooperating after all. This gives us the context necessary to decode the episodes. The Gnomes episode, for example, corresponded with the buyout by Intel and Netscape. Big backers is about a small coffee house being purchased by the massive Starbucks. December 14, 1998, Gnome's primary backer, Red Hat, sells to Intel/Netscape. Plus 2 days. December 16, 1998, Gnomes episode, South Park 17. Note the first thing offered for the shop is a keyless lock, as this corresponds with the point of keeping activities secure. Having big backers means more security, but of course that begs the question of what activities are being hidden. Home improvement begins with watching a local camera feed of the home, and this is the point. Putting on a show. When in reality his family is the show. The first episode of South Park focuses on aliens spying on Cartman using satellites out of his butt. Aliens are symbolic for people of foreign affiliation somewhere they don't belong. It's literally the textbook definition of illegal aliens. September 17, 1991, Linux debut. September 17, 1991, Home Improvement debut. September 17, 1991, North Korea UN membership. North Korea is the most secretive and closed-off place that has ever existed in the history of the planet. This is why, as I've decoded in many posts, it is a place used to store the most secret things in the world. Or at least it is used as a calm for safe storage. Storing things like blackmail and MK Ultra footage. These feeds are local, but I suspect only stored permanently in a place fully controlled and closed off like North Korea. This doesn't mean some local cells didn't keep their own copy of footage, but it was not the standard. Now that we understand some of the business connections, we can deduce more about relationships using pop culture. I just tied the default Linux/Unix OS, Gnomes, to Red Hat as it was the biggest backer. This means there is a correlation between South Park episodes and Red Hat history. July 14, 1999, South Park Meteor Shower Trilogy Part 1. July 13, 1999, Red Hat buys Atomic Vision United States Web Design. July 28, 1999, South Park Meteor Shower Trilogy Part 3. July 30, 1999, Red Hat buys Deluxe Computer GmbH Linux DIV Germany Computers and Software. This was a buying spree by Red Hat of major computer outlets. There is no money value given, but understand the very next purchase they had was for $674 million. Clearly these are not small investments. I'm going to go into these episodes later in the post, though if you've read my asteroid posts you already know the symbolism is tied to paid ops. It is what differentiates it from a comet com, as there is a mineral wealth to them. This gives away that Red Hat Linux is a massive company. August 11, 1999, Red Hat Linux, computer hacking, goes public, 8th biggest first-day gain in history of Wall Street. August 11, 1999, System Shock 2, Looking Glass Studio, famous game series that began with a hacker caught. August 10, 1999, Kevin Mitnick, most famous computer hacker of all time, sentenced. Looking at famous days like this with the biggest media released gives big clues on the connections. The most famous hacker of all time is bound to have comms tied to them, so I looked up the first game in the series. Notice two different prison connections. September 23, 1994. System Shock 1, hacker faces jail time for crime, trades hacking skills to gain freedom. September 23, 1994. Shawshank Redemption, Andy the banker jailed and trades banking skills for preferential treatment before escape. This was before Kevin Mitnick was caught, and it gives away that Mitnick was likely a big comms vehicle. A comm used to symbolize a large group of people hacking with Unix. Likely the sets of people who accepted ops tied to computer surveillance we've discussed had the prospect of law enforcement coming down on them, as they didn't hide nearly as well as expected, which is why they needed Unix after all. Rather than go in and arrest them one at a time, the entire set of cells were symbolized in one major news story. This is why both the sentencing and arrest both had major comms tied to it. It's also why the comms about the arrest came half a year before the actual arrest, as that was the setup for it. Brady material equals evidence intentionally withheld in courts. February 15, 1995. Mitnick FBI arrest after well-publicized pursuit. February 16, 1995. Alan Brady show with Dick Van Dyke parody, ranked 84th best episode of all time equals likely comms vehicle. February 17, 1995. Brady Bunch movie, starring Shelley Long. Mitnick was said to have the ability to start a nuclear war by whistling into a pay phone, and this is much like North Korea having nukes, symbolism for having goons that can be activated to murder on demand. MK brainwashing ops, as that is part of the point of these local operations with home surveillance. Having kids and molding them into monsters, this is not the only thing the ops are for, but it is a major one. The son on Home Improvement, Randy, got his start in the Brady Bunch. He also played the puppet Pinocchio as well as Simba in The Lion King, which was orchestrated by Elton John. I'll be returning to all those symbols later in the post. It gets confusing when we jump between too many different types of symbols, I bet. This is unavoidable because I'm still learning them myself. In the future I'll be able to chart out educational lesson plans that keep things from getting overwhelming. For now, you will have to put up with a certain amount of difficulty that comes with being hit with too many symbols you may not remember the meaning of. Like, for example, why is the mascot for Linux a penguin? The answer to that is tied to why Edward Snowden, as a computer hacker, has that snow symbol in his name. It has to do with frozen water comms, unmoving water. Why did they choose to symbolize gnomes in South Park with a Starbucks coffeehouse takeover? What is coffee as a comm? Why it's connected to hot water comms? Why is Pamela Anderson's most famous role after Home Improvement Baywatch, watching the water? Once again it's connected to water comms. The answer to all of these requires me explain the most basic of all symbolism comms. Water comms. When secret information becomes public, it's called a leak. Information that is true holds water. New information that is big makes waves. My point. The symbolism of water is information. Where can you interact with a large body of collected water? That'd be a pool for data exchange. Pool plus E. This is as basic as a symbol as it gets. It is a building block necessary to understand more complex comms ideas. A good example is a plant, as the symbol is also the common definition of the word. Therefore, plants need water. Equals CIA assets were being shown consequences. Manafort was a plant, officially a CIA asset, and therefore his being sent to jail sent a message, water, to other plants, plural. Q's, watch the water, was therefore saying to watch the news in relation to North Korea. Note the date Q highlights. March 5, the same day an agreement was made for Kim Jong-un to meet with Donald Trump. North Korea is the most closed-off place on Earth, therefore it is the symbol of a place where the most secret footage ends up at. If you notice in the background of the Clinton picture, they sit on plants and there is a raging torrent of water behind them. Conversely, there are no plants in the new pic. Just equals. Define plant, then, as in someone being puppet. To be a plant for someone else is the basic definition. This is why there are 6 people in puppeteer positions behind the 2. This is why they are on plants. No one sitting as puppets, and the water is calm in the new pic, not warlike. The whole NK movie was to threaten war, not embrace peace. After 3 years, NK did eventually start shooting missiles again, but those are comms best left for another post. The point for here is that you understand the difference between stormy waters on the left as puppets versus tranquil sunset on the right with Kim taking control from whoever had it before. While we are on the subject of heads of state, consider the current one in the USA. Did you know from 20 May 2020, Joe Biden's brother James Biden owned part of the Virgin Islands? A place called Water Island. Curiously, this is the closest island to Epstein Island. Did you know that Epstein Island's official name is St. James Island? Epstein lives at St. James Island. James Biden is the neighbor to Epstein at St. James. 1998, Jeffrey Epstein buys St. James in the Virgin Islands. 20 May 2020, James Biden owns Water Island, next door to Epstein's St. James Island. What does it mean to own Water Island? Might it imply some role in data collection? What is the connection with Epstein? The answer is in the symbolism for Ghislaine Maxwell. Note above the connection Q highlighted of Epstein to nearby islands, i.e. Joe Biden's. Consider that Water Island is connected to a nearby submarine base. Hiding in the water. Q also highlighted Maxwell's submarine piloting. Water equals info. And Maxwell officially runs her own country called Terramar on the ocean. What does she symbolize? Why Virginia Jewbilee and the Virgin Islands? Blackmail is the obvious connection to make. Reconcile her presentation showing 747s being caught in a net with the famous Epstein, Lolita Express, plane. What kind of calm is Maxwell in relation to water? Is there some kind of famous liquid tied to the name? Maxwell House Coffee. Ever hear of Maxwell House Coffee? Famously tied to Teddy Roosevelt and a night he spent at their hotel with their coffee. What does this mean? Consider how Teddy Roosevelt because POTUS. It took both the VP and POTUS above him dying to get him the ticket. He is the president who oversaw the installation of the owl in front of the White House. He is also McCain's role model as well as Bill Clinton's hero. He also pulled a Ross Perot to get an ultra-racist elected by splitting the Republican vote by running as a progressive. This is someone I've decoded extensively as blackmailed. I won't rehash those posts, but it is important for context here. I'll just include the South Park one where Teddy Roosevelt likeness is given as a pedophile, which also included golden elephant imagery throughout, but I'll get more into that episode later in the post. This is what it takes to create a plant. Someone you own forever. Joe Biden is tied to Water Island through James Biden, a place noted for protecting submarine bases and happens to be the closest island to Epstein Island, St. James Island, which is where Maxwell operated as a submarine pilot. So given water equals info and the Biden family owns part of Water Island, it could be inferred they are tied to data collection. Thus I suspect the symbolism of Joe Biden is much like Maxwell. The word being tied to Java will be of note later when we get into how surveillance is carried out electronically. Also, part of his Water Island was sold to his close friend Green. This was the head referee at Super Bowl 2010. I won't be going over Super Bowl comms in this post, just an interesting point. Especially as Joe Biden had just become VP the year prior. It makes me think Joe Biden's role was tied to control. So the symbol of coffee is tied to blackmail? I think it's more generic than that. Grand Theft Auto hot coffee scandal involving sex, but not blackmail. It's being in hot water. Coffee is 98% water and so it is primarily an information comm. The defining characteristic of it is being a stimulant plus hot plus filtered. The daily scandal-driven news could be symbolized as coffee. Why is blackmail tied to coffee? What happens when you get coffee on you? You get burnt. This is tied to the daily news as a scandal. Blackmail being uncovered would be front-page news if it were someone important. And it would be someone important for blackmail to be used. In fact, they would only become important specifically because they were blackmailed. Water can also be filtered, and the man most associated with filtering water is Alex Jones. He is often called in memes a humble water filter salesman. Note the filters he uses a misspelling of proper as proper. Water equals info, he is the filter for it. It goes through him. A literal war on information. Mainstream media promotes him by derision, people who don't trust mainstream media follow who they hate, and the sales from the victims of misinformation are what runs it. The products sold serve the dual purpose of identifying him to clowns. Remember, they need symbolism. Because it's literally how they communicate/identify each other. This is a parody, but it's all things he has said. Talking about eating babies, and goblins and how Obama literally smells like garbage. See how it works? That's why he got the big views from the right, the approved opposition. This is why he is allowed to cover taboo subjects, because he is giving you the talking points for them. Bringing up subjects you would be outraged about but then putting on a funny dance so that anyone you talk to it about will be repelled. Trying to get us to focus on calling a woman a man rather than debating a subject. In this sense you could use water or coffee to represent disinfo agents, and in fact another popular disinfo agent ties himself to coffee. He talks about gematria, which is disinfo. It exists to hide real comms. It does this by being similar to symbolism comms but with one crucial difference. Instead of directly interpreting symbolism, you feed a number into a machine that pops out unrelated symbols that you can interpret however you like. Let's go into specific examples of coffee. For example, if you've heard of the show Friends, you know it takes place in a coffee shop. The very first episodes are about one of the main characters getting a job at one. The highest-rated sitcom of all time takes place in a coffee shop. Let's look into the first episode and see if anything screams blackmail. The very first set of jokes about a dream he just had of being in high school naked. Only his penis is a ringing phone. Consider being blackmailed. How might this be communicated as a funny story? Perhaps by having your genitals turn into something that puts you on call. Note the intro: everyone with umbrellas equals protection from water. Feeding the ducks, ducking, ducks equals repel water/exposure. This gets into how connected water and coffee symbolism is. The symbolism I believe for this show was in multiple parties blackmailing each other, not fearing being in the coffee because both sides owned each other. Rachel, Chandler, and Monica, played by Courtney Cox. Same time frame as when Monica Lewinsky was having sex with Clinton as the show, same hairstyle as well. The symbol being controlling Clinton. This I believe was shared blackmail between CIA and Mossad. Intended to foster friendship between groups of blackmailers. I suspect Friends may have symbolized a cooperation between the two entities. Going to blackmail each other, that way we each can control the other. That might this broke down for various reasons with the exposure of Clinton through Monica, but that's a longer story. I cover some of them in my CIA plus Mossad post, and I go into more Friends comms. This lack of protection is much like losing an umbrella, or an inability to put on a poncho. Which is the same symbol used for both W. Bush and Trump's inauguration. A message sent of lack of protection for information. They can't stop water from getting onto them. Of the 6 friends, the most obvious comms names given what we know in history is Rachel and Chandler. Surely you've heard of Rachel Chandler. Tied to child handling. The control of the royals being symbolized in various news stories involving black diamond truffles. The very same thing Rachel Chandler tattooed on her inner lip multiple times. She also posted screen caps of video footage of Epstein's home on social media around the same time as Bill Maher joked about global pedophilia. July 19, 2013, Rachel Chandler posts Epstein footage. July 19, 2013, Bill Maher jokes about a global pedophilia event tied to the Catholic Church. I think to truly understand coffee comms we need to go in depth into one major one. Hopefully you recall early in the post when I went into the South Park Gnomes episode. August 13, 1997, South Park debut. Plus 2 days. August 15, 1997, GNOME Primary OS for Linux debut. December 14, 1998, GNOME's primary backer, Red Hat, sells to Intel/Netscape. Plus 2 days. December 16, 1998, Gnomes episode, South Park 17. Coffee house takeover by Starbucks. We already have a bit of a cheat sheet on the meaning here, as it is tied to the primary OS of Linux, Gnomes, development selling to Intel/Netscape. This is parroted in the show episode Gnomes by having Starbucks buy out a local coffee house. A famous episode that's all about coffee and gnomes that break into kids' rooms and steal their underpants. I'm not joking, sounds like blackmail might tie into this. Well, let's go through it. South Park Coffee, the Underpants Gnomes. This episode begins with the teacher giving an assignment to do a current events presentation. He sets up the South Park main characters to partner with Tweak, the constantly paranoid child that happens to live in a coffee house. When the boys assert they can't work with him, Mr. Garrison gives a long story about medical center and Chad Everett getting a new partner involving an attractive woman that gets his brother a kidney transplant. What does this story mean? I have to take a detour here because when I looked up medical center to understand the comms joke here, I noticed a few interesting things. There are many pieces of media tied to surveillance and hiding evidence. This show begins the same time frame as Brady Bunch. Brady material, symbolism of hiding evidence. The maid being Alice being a part of the com. September 23, 1969. Beatles, Paul is dead, rumor hits mainstream media, medical emergency. September 24, 1969. First Elvis convention. September 24, 1969. Medical center begins. Plus 2 days. September 26, 1969. Brady Bunch first airs. September 6, 1976. Medical Center TV series ends. September 6, 1976. Legendary partners Jerry Lewis reunited with Dean Martin first time in over 20 years. September 5, 1976. Jim Henson's The Muppet Show premieres on television with Kermit as star. This looks to be a transition point for Ops. It started with Beatles/Elvis/Brady and ends with a legendary partnership reunited. I've covered in past posts how Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin's partnership symbolized CIA plus Mossad getting together, but what's particularly interesting here is the day before it ended The Muppet Show began. Jim Henson had a Kermit variant, 2 years after Kermit introduced, as spokesman for Red Diamond Coffee. Specifically appearing in dozens of commercials like for Wilkins Coffee where he would murder another puppet that refuses to drink it. He coerces the puppet with a camera that kills. It's technically a different puppet but outside the eyes not being ping pong balls the rest is practically identical. There are dozens and dozens of these commercials. This was Jim Henson's big break. It may unlock the symbolism of Kermit the Frog. The old symbol of boiling water with a frog. Making coffee equals boiling water. The concept perhaps being to slowly desensitize the viewers to acts that would otherwise cause rejection, like presenting murder over a disagreement as casual and even positive. Before they know it the subject has embraced what would have once been grotesque beliefs. We see this online in all sorts of places. Slowly boiling a frog. This symbol could be applied not just to violence and radicalism but to sex and drugs as in each case there is a period of normalization associated with it. The main difference with Kermit is he has ping-pong ball eyes, and so does Homer Simpson. May 9, 1955. Kermit the Frog introduced ping-pong eyes. May 10, 1955. Homer Simpson official birthdate. Symbol of a puppet. In Homer's case his bad parenting. His original iteration involved him and Lisa, computer com, tricking Bart into injuring himself more and more through dares. Just like Frog in boiling water doing it gradually. The symbolism tied to him with monitors and nuclear are ones I've covered and tie into home surveillance. May 9, 1955. Harpo marks Lucille Ball mirror routine. May 9, 1955. Kermit the Frog introduced ping-pong eyes. May 10, 1955. Homer Simpson official birthdate. Harpo Oprah mirror copy. So it fits the symbolism that she is the voice for someone else. I'm reminded of that South Park episode with her, where her body parts were portrayed as having a mind of their own and making decisions for her. Anyway, I'll return to Kermit comms later. I just wanted to note this other coffee comm tied to this South Park coffee episode. Note the prominent Java, as that is tied to coffee and is also a notoriously unsafe from its introduction back in 1995 and prominent usage since then. Especially during the time when this episode aired. A much more blunt comm comes in the form of what service Mr. Tweak offers. Note the officer Bar Brady comes in and gets the usual. The usual being he gets hit in the face with a cat. What is a 5-letter word for cat? Officer Bar Brady equals Brady material. The following scene is where we get our first discussion of the Underpants Gnomes. To which Eric Cartman asserts this explains his own missing underwear. This is because both symbolize abused children. Cartman having a prostitute for a mother could also be considered a wink on this. The local coffee house story is one of a blackmailing operation being picked up by a larger blackmailing operation. Being standardized, this will become more clear later. Before we get to that though the boys join Tweak as his oral report buddies, and are then given coffee, one recurring joke is the selling of tweak into slavery. The father asserts he can use the children to turn the situation against Starbucks. I'm going to jump ahead to explain how. The father gets the kids to act as his puppets, which is used to turn the town against Starbucks. Note what Kyle says in reflection of his role in this. "My butt hurts." This ties into the focus on them being the oral report buddies. These, along with the underwear stealing gnomes, are all comms about how blackmail using kids works. Turning it into political power, in this case getting the whole town to kick Starbucks out before they can do the same. This is why they want to buy him out and why he owns the police by hitting him with a cat every day. This is why the first thing the Underpants gnomes call Cartman a what? What's a 5-letter word for a cat? But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Underpants gnomes come in much later in the story. Let's actually go in order to understand this fully. So after they drink coffee, a bunch of toys appear in the room. This could represent getting paid, as participation yields rewards for kids like toys. Though children involved are usually sedated. Note their stomachs all hurt, and they don't know why. First thing said to the father is they are totally screwed. The father then gets them to act as his plants, and turn the city against Starbucks. Literally, as this happens, the gnomes steal the child's underpants again. And because blackmail is involved despite the forced stilted delivery, they get the town on their side with a speech that is clearly not written by them. Again turning blackmail into political power as it leads to a law being passed. Note just as the law discussion with the mayor begins, the gnomes steal the underpants of the mayor's assistant. Nobody but Tweak can see this despite it being in broad viewing and him obviously capable of seeing it himself. A symbol of control of political bodies. A joke is made about missing underpants being widespread because these jokes have to work for both comms aware and not. Then a televised debate, and note the difference in treatment, with Starbucks being called bad names and given no chance to argue. This too is what blackmail can do. Skew an argument any way desired. The audience acts as sheep to the speaker. The kids on the other hand are painted as handsome and say nothing but that this guy is bad. The boys win the argument and then go on to making commercials, which is a funny little take on using children as props. These jokes have to work for everyone after all, and South Park is great at double meanings. Comparing the coffee pushing to Camel cigarettes. The camera calm with a hump. Same year as Cherry Humps, humping. This is a story about a big blackmailer trying to take over a small one. This fits with Starbucks itself. Note the logo, a mermaid with breasts exposed spreading legs. I'll get more into Starbucks comms later, but just the logo alone should be clear enough for now, though if we go into the origin point, note these comms. March 26, 1971, Fukushima nuclear plant begins operations. +2. March 28, 1971, Ping Pong Diplomacy World Table Tennis Championship begins. +2. March 30, 1971, Starbucks begin Pike Place. Name inspired by the first mate Starbuck on Moby Dick. Fukushima, much like Chernobyl, is a place I've decoded to be the symbol tied to blackmail. The ping pong diplomacy comms are tied to the origins of the electronic industry, which ties into the surveillance ops in the spying/recording. The original 17 Starbucks stores that existed before the massive expansion in the 90s seem to have been a cooperation between multiple countries, but let's get back to the episode. This is where we finally get to the Underpants gnomes, who are experts at business. Calling the gnomes a pecker, as the gnomes call Cartman a 5-letter word for a cat. The most famous part of this episode is the "What is Phase 2" plan for stealing underpants. This is a clever way to hide a disturbing joke, as it can be used to represent not having a plan, but in context of blackmail. Perhaps it'll make more sense if I say it this way. Phase 1, take off subject's underwear. Phase 2, classified. Phase 3, become successful, blackmailed. So they trade their underwear for a lesson on corporate takeovers. They then become advocates for Starbucks, asserting good business is the reason we have canned soup, cars, computers, and Starbucks. Each one representing an op I've discussed before tied to either blackmail or MK driving. The reason why business get promoted to national scale is in the trade for resources. Starbucks negotiates the buying of the small coffee house, and after another joke about selling the child into slavery, the episode ends with more underwear theft. Note the story was written by Brady Material. Likely the connection to promoting Starbucks comes from their own connection to those ops which I will be going over later. So this was all about Starbucks takeovers. It begs the question of what kind of comms they are involved in. As we have been talking about Brady Material, it's worth noting the greatest football player of all time, Tom Brady, born within a day of when Q clearance began, just so happened to have gotten his start the day a game called ICO was first released. ICO is an interesting name, as within a week of that release another ICO began. The International Coffee Organization Agreement went into force. September 23, 2001. Tom Brady debut September 24, 2001. ICO famous game North America, came out before Japanese version, October 1, 2001. ICO, International Coffee Organization entered into force coffee. I may decode this game at a future date, just an oddity that struck me as unlikely a coincidence. After all, what does ICO mean? Brady Material tied to the 1977 Q clearance, but that part of it I've gone over many times. The ICO connection is new, and the time frames are indicative. The plot of ICO I need to dig into, but the very first line of the description is about human sacrifice of children, so it fits quite a bit of what we've been talking about, though I need to dig deeper to grasp what it actually says. Furthermore, as I covered Shawshank Redemption, note in the original story it ends in March of 1977 with a ticket to escape from government by going overseas. That timing of red KGB symbol gives us everything necessary to decode the story more in depth. 1977 is when Q clearance began and all the local computer ops moved overseas, so with this we understand the root symbol of the story, as it represents a freedom from being under the watch of the US government. It was published in 1982, which is when they were promoting the same thing, trying to get allies of Reagan to turn on him, to effectively escape, and this is represented here with the nod of Shawshank Prison, which is likely a comm once again tied to Brady Material, though to understand why requires a small detour. Tom Brady symbolizes Brady Material control. He was born the same day of the MKUltra hearing and one day before the changes in Q clearance. Given Tom Brady symbolized this protection of evidence from 2000-2020, what athletes symbolized it during the time of Shawshank Redemption? Luckily a comm was sent that gives us a precise answer. Terry Bradshaw, Brad equals Brady, was the equivalent of Tom Brady during his time, and I know this because he used Tom Brady as a secret name just before retiring. Look it up, this is news. It's insane to think this could be chance given how connected their careers already were. The idea he just happened to use Tom Brady's name as an alias year before Tom Brady became the quarterback that matched his own records. As bizarre as that connection is, it's so precise that there can't be any other interpretation other than Terry Bradshaw was the same symbol in the 1970s and 1980s that Tom Brady became. This is why when Stephen King decided to make a fictional prison to represent being imprisoned by blackmail, he used Terry Bradshaw's name to do it. The symbol is of someone having dirt on you, of having Brady Material they choose not to make public, so you do their bidding. He added shank to Shaw because the symbol is of a place you don't want to be at. A place where you will get shanked. Next let's focus in now on Starbucks and Elton John. Starbucks plus Elton John. Remember how the show, Friends, took place in a coffee house? Where did they get that name? March 24, 1971, Starbucks founded. Plus 6 days. March 30, 1971, Friends, first soundtrack by Elton John. A story about underage sex. Also note the Beatles breakup happening the same day Elton John released his big breakthrough song, Your Song, which tells me that the entity behind the Beatles, at least the UK side of it, likely moved to Elton John with their assets at this point. April 10, 1970, Beatles breakup. April 10, 1970, Elton John Breakthrough released Your Song. Beatles symbolism tied to spying. Consider the symbolism of the stepdaughter of John Lennon being abducted. Born 2 days after the most famous hacker of all time. I highlighted +2 comms before in relation to the hacking, and I still don't get what it means, but it has registered in my mind as a thing tied to hacking comms. The connection goes deeper as well with Elton John. Starbucks and Elton John is specifically associated with stars. Starbucks equals buck, money, plus DOE, Q clearance, and of course stag party. His most famous glasses are his star glasses. His name is often tied to them. Though he has had many sunglasses, many being comms I've covered in one form or another. Note the gnome glasses as well as stars and diamonds and cats, all things that are comms I go over frequently, but his root symbol is clearly a star. He also did the soundtrack for a movie about gnomes along with Lady Gaga. Elton John may have his most famous iconography with stars, and while he has many top songs to potentially decode, for this post I think Rocket Man is the most relevant. Remember how Donald Trump would call Kim Jong-un Little Rocket Man? Remember the connection with Linux origin to North Korea? Note one of the most famous moments of Rocket Man is tied to William Shatner giving a performance of it during an awards show. In the show, Shatner and co-host discusses fantasy as it relates to science fiction, with fantasy being defined as gnomes, elves, fairies. I had already decoded gnomes in this post and elves in another, blackmailing tied to CIA, but this gives us fairies, as the juxtaposition of the three implies the one being preyed upon. This fits as gnomes being the ones that spy, the job, elves being the pimp/John that ones that own the enterprise, and that just leaves the prostitutes that entice/lure, and a fairy fits that symbolism perfectly. In context of Rocket Man's song during an award show for movies released in 1977. Star Wars wins the big awards. Rocket Man equals symbolism of firing a rocket to the stars. Writing the promotion as all the many parts of media work as one to put something in the consciousness of every person in the world. How do they control the people they shoot to the stars? Blackmail. Elton John and Star Trek connection. March 1, 1968. Elton John debut single, I've Been Loving You. March 1, 1968. NBC disrupts broadcasting for announcement that Star Trek will return due to unprecedented demand. You can see the patterns converging at key names and places. If we take a closer look at the Friends connection, I noticed an interesting news story that day. March 24, 1971. Friends film, underage teens have forbidden sex and childbirth before being caught by police. March 24, 1971. Washington Post broke the story of the FBI's COINTELPRO program of spying on U.S. citizens verifying documents. Without having watched it myself I can't fully decode it, but I do notice the main character's name is Barry, which makes me think it being about children having sex. That the symbolism was of burying this kind of material. Though that's a guess, it fits the pattern with his films, as Barry has only one other film before Friends, and it was a highly controversial X-rated film called If. June 22, 1992. The One Elton John. +2. June 24, 1992. Shaq draft famously big player. Shaq equals symbol for love. Shaq plus Q, 17. +2. June 26, 1992. Starbucks went public, $17 a share IPO. June 26, 1992. Atari goes defunct, ops transition. Given the Starbucks logo is a literal mermaid siren inviting sex. The connotation of stars, and money, bucks, and secrets, DOE, the expansion and takeover of local coffee houses may well have standardized blackmailing. It implies, just like with the South Park episode of Gnomes, that there were many local blackmailing operations before it. This doesn't mean Starbucks has a monopoly on blackmail. January 21, 2000. Kevin Mitnick, most famous computer hacker, released. January 21, 2000. Lollicup Coffee founded. Lolita, symbolism with coffee founded. In fact, Starbucks in China and other places have more competition now than they ever have had. In China, a buck-themed coffee house has more locations than them. You surely understand buck as a symbol by now, but what about mermaid? There is a mermaid attraction in Florida which caught my eye called Weeki Wachee, the deepest naturally formed spring in the USA. This place has been active since the 60s doing shows with mermaids for kids. Like with any attraction like this, it involves kids getting their pictures taken with them. Consider symbolism comms and what that might represent when done with comms in mind. The symbolism of a mermaid being of a siren luring with sex. Consider this attraction was founded by Newton A. Perry, Knapp initials. Sleeping symbol. As I often propose, one way blackmail involving kids persists is because it involves sedation so that the child isn't aware of it outside of some pains in the morning. That's a theory, but I doubt a place like this could exist for this long without having some kind of ops attachment. The symbolism of Weeki Wachee as in watching, the time frames fits for when these kinds of watches were prominent. The modern iterations of those same ops flowing all the way to South Park, so let's return to that. I said I'd go over those 3 Meteor shower episodes tied to Red Hat purchases, and so let's do that. August 13, 1997, South Park debut. Plus 2 days. August 15, 1997, GNOME primary OS for Linux debut. December 14, 1998, GNOME's primary backer, Red Hat, sells to Intel/Netscape. Plus 2 days. December 16, 1998, Underwear Gnomes Coffee Takeover episode, South Park 17. July 14, 1999, South Park Meteor Shower Trilogy Part 1. July 13, 1999, Red Hat buys Atomic Vision United States website designer. July 28, 1999, South Park Meteor Shower Trilogy Part 3. July 30, 1999, Red Hat buys Deluxe Computer. Keep in mind in 2000 Red Hat spent over $500 million for one purchase, so these were not small purchases. The symbolism of a meteor shower being tied to purchasing these massive companies fits given the symbolism of meteors I've gone over. They symbolize ops in motion, and the mineral aspect is tied to the funding. This is a takeover and investment, i.e. funding ops. What kind of comms would be sent for this? The first of the 3. South Park Meteor Shower and Wild Wild West. This episode begins with a parody of Wild Wild West. There is a little skit with Cartman alongside a Kermit the Frog parody acting out the film. Saving Salma Hayek from a big metal spider as she talks about getting tacos and burritos. This is the same catchphrase given to the much more famous Jennifer Lopez years later, and given context of takeovers I recognize this as a likely symbol for taking over shells. Hence a shell babysitter. However, there is more going on than just this, specifically why the parody of the Wild Wild West. He carries on this parody throughout the whole episode. Did you know the South Park movie opened the same day as Wild Wild West? June 30, 1999. Wild Wild West famously bad movie. June 30, 1999. South Park movie. I've decoded a number of famous movies that were released around the same time, and I think this is a perfect example. It unlocks the point of sorts. Wild Wild West. What did that film symbolize? The most famously bad movies are done this way on purpose, and given this is the biggest black mark of Will Smith's early career, this is an obvious contender, especially for the famous giant metal spider scene. Note the start of the film involving a water tower collapsing as Will Smith tells a girl to treat him bad. As in, there is a full awareness this is going to be a bad movie. And as for why? Wild Wild West. www equals World Wide Web. What is the giant metal spider? Consider that at the time Microsoft was being broken up. It never finished, but it was intended. Note the difference in treatment. This fits perfectly with the movie, which has Bill Gates being executed for Windows 98. Remember that South Park symbolized the alternative to Windows on PC with Gnomes OS on Unix. This is why South Park was promoted and a www metal spider was torn down. It was a marker for media. Push one entity down, in this case Microsoft, and prop another up in the form of alternatives. I'm somewhat surprised by this, but it seems he angered the powers of the time by trying to take market share other companies wanted in on, like Google perhaps, that wanted to have control. Clearly this didn't last, heck they didn't even get broken up, but for a short time it was a thing. I could decode the whole movie in the future, but I want to move on, though I will say I think Saddam Hussein's prominence is due to him being an equivalent of Kim Jong-un. His weapons of mass destruction being the data collection. Also South Park pushing division warfare. I think in later seasons they broke away from this kind of propaganda, especially given they take on Scientology, but in their initial rise to fame it was critical to check all the boxes it seems. So to return to the episode, the whole trilogy of episodes focus on this one meteor shower. With Cartman's story being cat orgy, as he is spending the meteor shower being babysat by Shelley. The primary conflict in the episode involves Shelley as a preteen bully with an adult band leader trying to rape her. Note the star on his red shoes. This is juxtaposed with the cat being in heat and watching nature shows about cat sex and snorting catnip like cocaine. This is all symbolic of the kinds of activities with blackmailing. This is why Cartman throughout the episode collects evidence on him. Parties with underage girls and future rock stars. Securing them before they are allowed to make it big. This connection of cats and feces to blackmail reminds of some of the most expensive coffee in the world. Kopi Look, which is made from a cat-like animal that digests coffee cherries, and the poop is made into expensive coffee. This was first made widely known by National Geographic in 1981, and I suspect it represents powerful blackmail, but I need to dig further into it. The only other animal I can find that shares this distinction of expensive animal feces coffee is for elephants. Anyway, Cartman takes pictures and later records audio of the predator. This is followed by him singing a song about how he pledges allegiance to Shelley. She then sings a song about turds. Feces symbolism is of evidence, and the constant talk of turds is symbolic of the same. Another part of the symbolism is Shelley's braces. I've come to realize a pattern with Sid from Toy Story, Beavis and Butthead, and this one there is the symbolism in securing a psychopath. In each case it's tied to someone that acts as a psychopath that is designed to be unleashed at any time to kill, but I'll go more in depth on that in a future post. Notice his speak and record bear and contrast with before how his mother said he would be making bears by directly comparing the recording with making feces. It's a frustratingly childish thing to have to dissect, but then that's the point as it makes explaining it an exercise in futility. Without preparation in understanding that world it comes off as lunacy. Anyway, the band leader tries to rape and as a result loses his music as it's covered in cat feces and broken strings. People watching key participants that go farther than they are supposed to and then get punished for it by exposing their blackmail recordings. Given some of these environments are drugged-up parties, like the cats have here, this is likely an issue. The symbolism of the pedophile Skylar Morse with a star and red shoes. Morse comms as in being comms aware, and he does become a star in a later episode. The red shoes comm doesn't just apply to the men involved either, the concept in Podesta art here. Q had us juxtapose it with a pool in Rome which I wish I had more information on, but I can still decode the art in relation to it. I went over pool symbolism earlier as it related to a water comm as in the environment where comms are sent. Notice the nooses at bottom of pool around are avoided by going up ladder to potted plants. Girls at bottom of pool equals no shoes and welts on butts plus heads to nooses. Girls that climb up from nooses become plants, this is why they get red shoes. Background is gold symbolizing wealth/success. The difference here is for a child learning comms, if you'll notice the girls on the bottom half of them have horizontally striped shirts which is a closed-eye comm, not comms aware, I've gone over before. This is about becoming comms aware as a child and the danger of not doing so. The ones that manage it and learn how not to sink become plants for the funders and the ones that don't get the nooses as in sacrifice. As in being offered into MK Ultra as they are guided into mental illnesses and self-destruction. The sacrificed child won't know this. The way education is done is through symbolism, so any child that doesn't pick it up didn't know anything in the first place. This ties into the NK comms we went over before. The raging water behind Podesta with plants of two presidents as puppet master loom over them in relation to the calm sunset, end of a day symbol, after they flip. Which water would drown a person? Given how NK ties into the MK world surveillance, this seems to have been an agreement to end these horrible practices. Albeit only ending it on that side with recordings does little when the ones that abuse are local. Meteor Shower 2, two guys naked in a hot tub. The second episode has the distinction of being the first episode with Butters with a major role. It involves a meteor shower party with a hot tub. The boys play a game dressing up in girls' clothes while the father gets in a hot tub naked and watches another man masturbate. These are both humiliating situations, and the plot focuses on the building fear of Stan's father as he fears exposure of his act. The symbolism of hot water here is much like coffee symbolism. The juxtaposition of the kid's story with adults are both scenarios that would fit into an MK label. Getting a kid to put on a dress to play a game and then humiliating them for it publicly. We don't see the humiliation phase in this episode, but Stan does encourage their game and imply he will be a bully to them at the end. Both of these stories run alongside the ATF outside picking off residents one by one while giving the excuse that the party is a suicide cult. This could be a justification for surveillance ops, as the way the situation with potential police issue is resolved is by a recording sent to the media. With a plunger, feces retrieval, being attached to Brady evidence, to get the footage to a local journalist who forces the police to stop harassing the cult. So this is a reason to support the Unix ops with recording of everything as it can diffuse as necessary police intervention in ops. The journalist claims he will make millions from the video, so it's also promoting a monetary benefit to it all. Getting the police to not harass them is probably a big issue when running MK ops and blackmail. Remember that these comms were all running alongside Red Hat buying a bunch of computer support places, so the idea of marking their role in the comms world fits. Anyway, next for the final one is also the most educational for context on the tech side of things. Meteor Shower 3, Jewbilee. This one involves a fictional Jewish kids camp that Kyle sneaks Kenny into. There is talk of a snooping bear, and if you recall the extensive bear symbolism from the Cartman episode, it implied storage of recordings. In this context, the implication is of an intruder, which will become more clear as a symbol later. Additionally, at the camp there are a number of different Jewish faiths represented, with the odd one being Elder Garth from the Synagogue of Anti-Semites. Anyway, the new children to the Jewish camp are given highlights, and notice first kid shown in the introductions to the camp has a shirt with a beaver cooking marshmallows into white goo. Beaver symbolism is of sex, and this gives away we are dealing with recordings of children here. The first episode was about blackmail ops using girls, the second episode was about MK ops, and this one seems to be about handling footage of child pornography with no relation to blackmail. As in the bulk footage of those surveilled. Note one of the kids introduced is a Chinese kid, and they lock him outside. Likely an effort to keep foreign governments from getting involved, and this will be more relevant later. Note the macaroni picture of Apple, Macintosh/computer symbol, then cat by math, as in many beavers, followed by triangle up, as in getting promotion for it. Then a joke which works regardless of comms, because of course these have to work as comedy and not just a string of comms. We then see a bear going through the trash. Q once said, "Nothing is ever truly deleted, and even if it were, the logs are still kept of it," and that is a common way to surveil by tracking those logs/file. So the boys go and hunt the bear while a traitor plots to take out the Jewish camp by overthrowing the head of the Jewish church, Moses. This brings us to the most interesting find of this episode, a parody of Tron as Moses. This deserves its own section. Tron. The original for reference. The master control program from 1982's Tron. In the episode it's presented as the leader of the Jews, but why would they pick this symbol? Obviously there is the computer connection, but why Tron? The plot of Tron being an evil controlling computer system taking over games. This reinforces a number of decodes I've made in the past in relation to how and why Atari was replaced with Nintendo. It gives us an understanding of how they viewed Atari and to get rid of them. It is precisely what happened after all, they got rid of the top of the games industry, and Tron is perfectly positioned for that. I decoded them to be tied to Israel, and here we have the same entity being given a position as the head of all Jews. This reinforces my old comms and gives me a way to solve that film should I ever choose to. Anyway, so Moses gets trapped and the bear that has been snooping all this time saves the day alongside Kenny. The bear just wanted the kids to play with her child with a honeypot. And after spending time with the bear they do a Chinese ladder to get the key. This ties into the Chinese kid from before as the message seems to be to include foreign ops as they can protect against local betrayals. The bear sends Kenny, MK, which frees Moses and allows them to kill the betraying Jew. They all agree to be more inclusive. And decide to honor Kenny with soap sculptures and macaroni pictures, given the context so far the symbolism here. Well, I could be wrong, so let's move on. This issue with coordination between foreign, local, Mossad, CIA, China, Japan, and Russia is a long-standing one. When I was digging into Friends this week I noticed that Ross Geller played as David Schwimmer, Swimming Comms, was Jewish. I noticed during the course of the show he gave birth to a boy named Ben. This was during the same timeframe as the PM Benjamin Netanyahu came into power. What's even more interesting about that is the choice of that particular name. Benjamin Netanyahu. 1995 son of Jewish Schwimmer, named after a janitor, Ben. 1995 Yahoo startup. November 2, 1995. On Friends Phoebe performs the song Smelly Cat, famously negative portrayal. November 2, 1995. Soup Nazi, famously negative portrayal, Nazis are against what type or person. November 4, 1995. Israeli Prime Minister Rabin assassinated. 1996 Ben Netanyahu becomes PM first time. Haven't pursued it enough to verify, but I suspect that the smelly cat symbolism as well as the Nazi ties into the removal of the PM. The janitor symbol being tied to a cleanup that necessitated a change in leadership. Yahoo connection on the other hand might have been the carrot as an agreement was made for them to be the top online. They were for several years until Google eclipsed them, and it was through Yahoo this happened as the two worked together. I have posts more focused on that side of things, so let's get back to South Park. Particularly I want to discuss Butters who got his start in that episode we just covered. He became the replacement for Kenny for several seasons, a role Tweak originally had. Given Tweak had symbolism of being raped at night, underwear gnomes, what then symbolism is attached to Butters? Butters. It's not a tough one to decode here. It's part of his name. Same thing really, just much more blunt. His first episode as the main character was having him as a parody of JonBenet Ramsey. A story tied to sexual abuse I go into in this post. The fact they chose to symbolize it with 1950s sitcoms like Leave It to Beaver reinforces it further. Those are shows I've also decoded tied to these kind of behaviors. October 4, 1957. Sputnik first Russian satellite launched, kicks off the space race. October 4, 1957. Iron Giant movie begins, story begins with Sputnik paper, boy and giant robot friend, boy plus recording device. October 4, 1957. Leave It to Beaver premiere. The pilot of Leave It to Beaver is also of note, right? April 23, 1957. Pilot Leave It to Beaver, It's a Small World, Disney ride involving many countries and children of them. April 23, 1957. Incredibles date given for a superhero getting cape stuck in a jet turbine death. I bring this up because as I went over in my Incredibles decode the symbolism for cape was the flag of a country. This distinguishes being blackmailed by a political power like the KGB in relation to something like control by a private enterprise. In context, it was promoting Facebook as an alternative to the tech enterprises attached to government. Again, that's another post. There are many episodes I could draw from to demonstrate Butters as symbolism tied to blackmail. Like the one where Butters while sleeping has Cartman undress Butters and put his penis in his mouth as pictures are taken. It's dressed up as ignorance, but when we look at it with comms. March 12, 2007. Starbucks launches recording label, signs part of Beatles. +2. March 14, 2007. Cartman sucks. Note also in that episode Butters not being aware of the sex acts performed on him. He gets sent to a gay reform camp where he meets a boy named Bradley who develops a crush on him. That's a Brady evidence comm, and if you read the underlined part above you'll notice he hides a 1979 male underwear catalog which he gets in trouble for. This is a reference to Q clearance as the whole point of it was in moving nuclear footage like child blackmail overseas in 1977, so by looking at a symbol of child pornography in 1979 it gets him Brady in trouble. In his first episode he spent almost all of it cross-dressing with other boys. There's actually another episode where he does the same thing. So in this episode Butters is introduced as being so good at sucking he should work at a Thai massage parlor. A title he takes pride in. After learning of rule changes for safety Randy Marsh proposes the boys wear bras and hug with tinfoil hats and play with balloons as a sport instead. The joke of sarcastiball is supposed to be in the sarcasm, but when we apply comms to it, Butters becomes the star player, and it's asserted this is, sarcastically, this new sport is the most important thing given an election is coming up. Butters talks extensively about this gooey place deep down, and this is where the symbolism gets more blunt as we find that Butters has been ejaculating in bottle and saving it for later. Butters has countless pounds of his own semen in his closet. How to make a star, blackmail with child. So the vast amounts of it represent the quantities of people blackmailed for it. This is why the top stars begin drinking Butters' semen. It's why there is this giant list of prominent figures attached to children. How else could people be controlled when there are so many powerful entities out there? As soon as fame is built, what else stops them from leaving for their own desire of freedom? Anyway, the episode finishes turning the whole subject into obvious jokes, making it clear to the audience what they saw wasn't coded messaging about raping children but instead a joke about ruining football. There is one more South Park episode one want to discuss here. Super Adventure Club. An episode focused on Chef as child predator, his final episode. This was after their Scientology episode got Chef to quit, and then he said bad things about South Park leading to a rebuttal of sorts. Why they chose to have a rebuttal by portraying Chef as a child predator? Well, let's get into that. Butters is the only one that asserts he had been sexually abused, and it's framed as a joke. So the boys try to find out how Chef became obsessed with a desire for children, leading to the Super Adventure Club as the culprit, a club of rich men that go around doing exactly what Chef is trying to do. This is of course blackmail symbolism with children, something we already know they are no strangers to. The difference here is they are talking openly about it. Note the framing of the language. The reason Chef has been saying those terrible things about us is because he's been brainwashed by this fruity little club. It has nothing to do with Chef actually being a pedophile, but yet they chose this way of presenting him. I'll get back to that. So to cure his brainwash they bring him to a strip joint. Note the woman that wakes him up is a big fat black woman wearing stars. This is symbolism of South Park making Chef a star. That he loved the popularity. Of course, he owes them big time for making him a star, yet as soon as they spoke out against Scientology Chef tries to shut them down. Why? The whole show is about offending after all. The reason is that back then it was taboo to offend Scientology. South Park was the first that I know that took them down a peg. Chef detonated his own career by trying to make an issue of their parody. Cartman, if you want to go around the world molesting kid, that's totally fine. The issue isn't with blackmail, but with Scientology not allowing any criticism. Now we get to the history of the Super Adventure Club. which is a parody of their rundown of Scientology true beliefs. A parody also of Teddy Roosevelt and one other thing I'll get to. The sex with kids symbol is also parody of Scientology's founder being a noted pedophile. Note he has the last name of Phineas, that's one letter away from the name of Jules Verne character from Around the World in 80 Days. This takes place around the time of that story too, and given he is presented as traveling the world in a balloon, it's clear there's a parody going on there. Kermit's symbol in the coffee shorts also invoking that story. One could argue it's just a popular symbol, but as my prior Jules Verne decodes go into, these sci-fi stories are the period equivalent comms to the same things. Seems like a good point to discuss Teddy Bear, a toy named after Teddy Roosevelt meant to sleep with kids, as well as his own daughter, Alice, famous sleeping symbolism. Also his wife's name is Edith Kermit Roosevelt. Though that is probably coincidence. November 1864. Alice's Adventures Underground. November 25, 1864. Jules Verne voyage to the center of the earth. So they rescue Chef, but then he turns his back on them only for a bridge to burn away, and Bear rips him to shreds. This is the most educational part, as the bridge burned when he rejected their help. This is what killed Chef. The bridge was much like how anyone burns bridges, it's a well-known idiom. The reason this kills him, and why this is their response, is because the whole episode is in effect a warning. They recorded Chef for countless hours in recording sessions, and this whole episode is built with using those recording sessions, but given how offensive he was in what we see, can you imagine what he said in the parts we didn't see? This is why Chef is turned into Darth Vader. Symbolism of a human recorder. Telling Chef that if he crosses any more lines in what he says about them, then they will release what they have and destroy him fully. Note Elton John with star glasses at his funeral. So it all comes back around to that. Okay, finally done with South Park. Odds and ends. Here's one set of coffee comms I still haven't solved. May 31, 1994. Elton John, Lion King movie soundtrack. May 12, 1994. Pulp Fiction Coffee Intro premieres film festival. May 19, 1994. Coffee Table Book episode. May 19, 1994. Frasier, My Coffee with Niles over their daily coffee, only episode to use Niles' name in title. Niles equals name of killer of IRL of Kelsey Grammer's father. I'm not sure what was symbolized this week, but there was a ton of comms about coffee, as well as a famous Elton John song, though that may not be related. Later that year. Another famous coffee comm that happened just as another famous Elton John song and major Pepsi news happened. August 8, 1994 Liebeck famous case hot coffee lawsuit. August 9, 1994. Circle of Life. August 11, 1994. Pepsi agrees Starbucks deal. August 14, 1994. Space Telescope Hubble photographs Uranus with rings. August 18, 1994. 6-year-old girl from Miami, Florida fell out of one of the ride's boats while it was in the loading area. Orange County. Yet another coffee comm I couldn't quite crack. Joe DiMaggio coffee plus Marilyn Monroe. Coffee plus sex and CIA. DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe staying at Imperial Hotel in Tokyo on their honeymoon. 1995 Cafe Vita Seattle opens, loanword A. February 27, 1996. Pokémon Green Red, loanword A. July 11, 1996. Coffee Cafe, loanword A, first opens. July 30, 1996. Starbucks opens in Japan first foreign store. Noticing that Starbucks opened in Japan same timeframe as Pokémon began there strikes me as interesting. I highlight the Seattle coffee comms as Nintendo purchased the Seattle Mariners. There aren't many coffee houses that have that Pokémon accent-y, so to find it in 1995 in Seattle of all places. Well, for context, I decoded the KGB connection before as the transition post-Soviet collapse. It seems Japan took the burden in between collapse and rebuilding to fund/coordinate. This is something sports does, check my sports posts for that. 1988 Ken Griffey Sr. moved from Reds, Russia, to Mariners. 1989 Ken Griffey Jr. begins in Mariners. December 23, 1991. Nintendo of Japan agrees to buy Seattle Mariners / Ken Griffey Jr. / Sr. stated as thanks for Americans buying Nintendo products. December 25, 1991. Soviet collapse, KGB, Ken Griffey Jr. becomes a top star. Moves to Reds later. This is why I'm often decoding Nintendo games, as their sudden rise and fascinating history with certain franchises like Pokémon seem crucial to understand. This week I cracked Kid Icarus. Eggplant symbolism with Medusa as final boss. Medusa symbolism for controlling with sex, making men hard, and the main character being a Cupid symbol collecting hearts, possibly in recruiting those who are blackmailed and then blackmailing them and putting them under their own protection. The most famous thing about the series likely the eggplant curse, symbol of a penis, with it requiring having to go to a goddess to remove the curse. This game was created by the designer of the Game Boy, which itself was tied to the day the Berlin Wall fell. November 9, 1989, fall of the Russian-built Berlin Wall. November 1989, Tetris released, a Russian game about walls with a song historically tied to sex, blackmail, and control. But I need to move on, one more major comm to discuss. There are many ways water is used, and I'm always finding new ones. It's very consistent. For example, given that water equals info, what then is the symbol for the tallest dam in the USA? Dam, water storage. It's not hard to understand if I lay it out like this. May 19, 2017, Oroville Dam spillway shut down to allow demolition and repair to begin. May 19, 2017, Anthony Weiner pleads guilty to sexting 15-year-old teenage girl. This is the famous laptop case with evidence that could sink a lot of high-profile people. If it were just this one date matching, I wouldn't view this as a major connection, but we are just getting started. January 2017, spillway Oroville Dam opened in preparation for floods. January 2017, prosecutors weighing charges against Weiner. February 11, 2017, emergency spillway began carrying water for first time since being built in 1968. May 11, 2017, dam hearing takes place. May 19, 2017, Anthony Weiner hearing pleads guilty, reported days before 19th. This helps clarify a connection I had long suspected, because you know what the next time the Oroville came into the news for water spilling? April 7, 2019, Oroville DWR water release peaks April 7. April 8, 2019, Allison Mack pleads guilty to sex trafficking charges Nexium. Speaking of Allison Mack. Plants and dirt symbolism. In fact, Q specifically pointed out her symbol tied to a canary palm tree, canary being singing. And of course HRC. Though to return to the Oroville Dam. Know who else is connected to news of it? July 22, 2009, Oroville River valve accident sucked into tunnel. July 22, 2009, Epstein released from prison. July 22, 2009, Buzz Aldrin reveals existence of monolith on Mars moon. $400 million, I suspect this is the emergency lever, as in much like setting fires for insurance, they have a deal with contractors to fund things by breaking a dam and cashing in what is effectively hundreds of millions of dollars. This being used to pay for cleanup. Though that's a wild guess. Another curious find when I contrasted this dam was this one. May 3, 1968, Jim Henson hired to work on Easy Bake Oven. May 4, 1968, Oroville Dam opens, the biggest dam. This may be nothing, but if the dam symbolized keeping child blackmail, then this could clarify a few symbolic points. The original ad having the girl with the name, price, as in cost of using a local girl potentially, and the little yellow bird being the origin of a Sesame Street character. This may give the origin of Big Bird, which along with Sesame Street I've partially decoded, being tied to the access, open sesame, of various agents trading their privacy for business opportunity. Kenner is most known for producing the original Star Wars line of toys. This is notable as the symbolism for Star Wars, as I've gone into before, is of moving secret info out of range of the US government. It ties into the 1977 Q clearance changes. Star Wars was 1977 after all. Prior to those changes. December 22, 1964. Oroville Dam nearly destroyed by heavy rain. December 22, 1964. CIA SR-71 Blackbird first flight. June 3, 1968. ARPANET published plan to create Internet, often cited as origin of the Internet. +2. June 5, 1968. Last CIA A-12 Blackbird to crash, lost in the South China Sea. This may be nothing, but I couldn't help but wonder if the Blackbird comms were tied to cells coordinated with an early version of the Internet. Ones that became obsolete as the actual Internet became a thing. Just a thought, I present early hypothesis along with more confirmed ideas. Another early hypothesis I've had this week is the concept of Kanye West's marriage to Kim being connected to Kim Jong-un of North Korea. June 1, 2018, Ye album Kanye. June 1, 2018, Trump announces Kim Jong-un summit back on track. This fits in a few ways. For one, Kanye West began dating Kim in 2011, which is around when the Kim transition happened in North Korea. Also, the symbolism South Park gave Kim and Kanye's relationship tying her to a hobbit, gnome, fits what I'd pegged North Korea's place in things. Additionally, September 30, 2003, Robert Kardashian death. September 30, 2003, Through the Wire Kanye West debut single, Wired Mouth equals keeping one's mouth shut. September 30, 2003, Elton John, The Lion King soundtrack original. Also a possible scandal symbolism with Donda, as the album involving his mother's death may symbolize information to be released in the future about assassinations, or people who aren't really dead, hence, listening party. August 26, 2021. Biden's dog Major bit Secret Service members 8 days in row email show. August 26, 2021. Chicago Donda listening party. That's an early hypothesis I still need to explore, but I have had a recent request for Kanye West, so I'm considering doing a deep dive into him soon. One last quick hypothesis. September 25, 1988. Billy Carter died famous for creating Billy Beer. September 24, 1988. Don't Worry Be Happy peaks at top stop on charts. The song with lyrics of whatever hardship will soon pass whatever it is, symbolism of the Carter side throwing the political race. This was the last time the left throws 1988, end of, Billy Carter. A song by a Big Mouth Billy Bass, Dead Fish. As in Big Mouth, talking too much, and the death of said fish, Billy Carter, who had embarrassed the left. It hitting in 2000 just as Al Gore was going against W. Bush was likely meant to invoke the same thing. A threat to anyone trying to undermine an election by acting like a fool as he did. I may further explore this one, the symbolism works, but that doesn't mean it's the correct answer, just a quick thought, so let's move on to updates. Updates. I got a quality tip this week pointing to a set of recent tweets by Ryan Cohen in relation to a man named Carl Icahn. I covered Ryan Cohen in past posts as it relates to the stock pushes going on the last few years. I know so little about stocks that it's hard for me to gauge who is on what side, but Elon Musk pushing his stock certainly leans towards patriotic. What's of particular note is this lead gave me the solution to that his curious name, Icahn, is an anagram for China. What's more, they pointed my attention to some very curious numbers, like how Ryan Cohen asserted he had a crush on China, and then tweeted the context being of their high-speed rail network spanning 22,000 miles. This is highly curious because the rail system is 40,000, but at the time Wikipedia listed Carl Icahn's wealth as being at 22 billion. Even stranger is that Wikipedia the very next day after the tweet changed the number from 22 billion to 24 billion, thereby making the com harder to detect. If not for the Wayback Machine, I would not have been able to confirm this. With all this in mind, it seems likely Ryan Cohen was making a comm to assert they had an ally in the form of Icon that was preparing to act. It also implies that this ally was an extension of China. That is great news. The Wikipedia changes raise my eyebrow, as well as it suggests there are forces trying to potentially sabotage anyone on the trail for decoding, but I'm glad for this, as I'm going to start paying closer attention to Wikipedia edit dates. The alliance with China through a billionaire is much like another billionaire I went over for Russia, Dmitry Rybolovlev. There seems to be individuals that exist as extensions of foreign powers. That isn't a certainty by any means, because there are countless factions inside any country, but it can make it easier to understand certain relationships without having to focus on the micro world of each business. I haven't had enough time yet, could be a future post, to dig into this gentleman, but when I looked up prominent dates attached to him, the first that caught my eye was this one. April 23, 2005. First YouTube video uploaded, me at the zoo. April 23, 2005. Icon Stadium opened. This could imply a China connection to early YouTube funding. This would connect to UN/Google. It could also imply, much like with Elon Musk buying Twitter, that YouTube could also be standing up to the threats against any telling the truth and preparing for a more wide-scale push towards enlightenment. Though I'm biased on what I hope is in the future, my few readers need to temper expectations with an understanding that my hopes are not necessarily perfectly aligned with the desires of many involved right now. I do have faith in the human spirit, and so whatever is to come, I hope to bend it as far as I can into freedom, transparency, and help for the many that need it. Also, his name, Icon, this got me to consider Icon connection, and I noticed this. September 18, 1998. ICANN is formed Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. September 18, 1998. Rush Hour released with Chris Tucker as Detective James Carter. This is more a guess than a decode, but it's interesting as his name is 6 letters away from icon H plus 6 equals N, so it works as a symbol, but I need to timeline this thing out before I say much more than that. Still, it bodes well for a potential alliance if this is someone connected to the ones in control of the root of the internet. It reminds me of just how far we've come since 2016-2017, back when Waleed was sending threats that imply China was on his side. Book sequence comms. Since then, he got arrested and removed from power. China has been harder to pinpoint, though I don't think them being an ally is a brand new thing. What might be new is a commitment to fund something that's coming. I'm sure funding issue is a big one for who is footing what bill. Though I had assumed most funding was done by printing, these kinds of comms seem to suggest it's also being done by existing funds. I think groups that do that will be glad they did when everything gets revealed. The world needs heroes, and when the truth is revealed, groups investing in the betterment of mankind would reap benefits of transparency. Having said that, given how much money has been printed in the past, I figured any amount to print now fine, so long as it enacts permanent change that course corrects for the long term. Though what do I know about economics? Certainly less than those in charge, but I know enough to know change is needed. I met a person years ago that had to work full-time to afford half of a tiny room's rent, splitting at times with 2 other people one bedroom, that didn't even have its own bathroom. Something is wrong with that, though compared to some places around the world that's probably like heaven. Even being able to get a job at all is. So much needs to happen, and I'm confident the right people are making the right choices to get us to a better place. Telegram chat. Join our Telegram group. Send leads, begin decoding. This has been Coffee and Water.